Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today we need to talk about some huge trade rumors regarding the Vancouver Canucks and the Minnesota Wild, regarding JT Miller or Brock Boeser, for potentially Kevin Fiala, and more from the Minnesota Wild. Now, we've seen a ton of trade rumors over the past couple of days, specifically regarding the Vancouver Canucks and potential moves that they would make if Jed Benning was still the GM and is still the GM. And right now, it looks like JT Miller and Brock Boeser are the two guys on the trade block and the most likely for Vancouver to trade, and we've now gotten confirmation that Minnesota is extremely interested in especially JT Miller and trading for him. But when it comes to this potential trade between Vancouver and Minnesota, what would this trade actually look like? What are the latest trade rumors on these two teams, and will we see a deal actually get done? Watch till the end for all the trade rumors and all of the news, and make sure that subscribe. But if you are new, 55% of the people that are watching are not subscribed. If you like hockey and if you like trade rumors, this channel is, simply put, the place to be. Now, I do want to clarify that we likely won't see both Brock Boeser and JT Miller included with a trade with Minnesota unless Jim Benning goes absolutely bonkers, but we have heard both of these guys be on the trade block, and especially JT Miller getting a lot of interest from the Minnesota Wild. Now, Ben Kuzma of the Province Vancouver put out a very interesting article recently, basically detailing and starting those rumors up, and Taj had a great quote basically summarizing those rumors, where he said this: Cuz reported the Wild have called about JT Miller. Goes on to say, he speculates that Fiala would be the player the Wild would offer in return. So we get some big news there. Obviously, the Minnesota Wild are interested in JT Miller, and they're calling about him. They want to acquire him. And also, Kevin Fiala would likely be the guy that would be offered in return for JT Miller, as well as probably something on top of that too. And this doesn't really surprise me too much, even though Minnesota, I don't think, has a huge need whatsoever for a guy like JT Miller. He would definitely be a great addition, and Kevin Fiala is a guy that's kind of been lost in Minnesota's system as of late, really in the last year and a half, really. He has some game-breaking skill, but it seems like his connection with the head coach Dave Evison hasn't really been as strong as of late, and it seems like the two haven't really met eye to eye. I'm pretty sure recently Kevin Fiala was taking off both power plays and just has not gotten the responsibility that he probably should have at this point in his Minnesota Wild tenure. So it does seem like Minnesota is shopping Kevin Fiala, and he might be the best player that Vancouver is able to get back if they do end up making a trade happen. Now, here we get a quote from Ben Kuzma in this Province article that I think was extremely fascinating, where he said this: Is Fiala and a second-round pick really enough for JT Miller? Would it take another pick to get it completed? Or is this just the Wild fishing and hoping to land a player who can help them get out of the tough division and make noise in the playoffs? And that, to me, is interesting. We also get confirmation that potentially a second-round pick might be involved. Maybe another pick on top of that would be involved in this JT Miller trade. But it seems like, for Minnesota at least, that is the blueprint that they're trying to make happen. They're trying to trade Fiala and a couple of picks to land a guy like JT Miller who's above a point per game and add him onto that top six. It seems like that is Minnesota's goal. Whether it's Vancouver's goal, we'll obviously cover in today's video, but it seems like for Minnesota, JT Miller is an obvious target and a guy that they want to get from Vancouver, whether Vancouver likes it or not. Now, there is also a quote from a recent Michael Russo article from The Athletic, who covers Minnesota Wild. Fantastic follow, and he put out an article a couple days back and had a really interesting quote in that article too, where he said this: Miller makes a ton of sense. For the Wild to take on a $5 million plus C with 2 years left on this deal, it would definitely have to be a dollar in, dollar out type move, which would mean that any big trade Darren considers, he'd likely have to give up a big name player like Kevin Fiala. Now, first things first, I mean, JT Miller can play center. I don't know if he would, though, in Minnesota. I don't know if that's exactly ideal, but maybe that's something that Minnesota's looking at. Maybe they actually look at JT Miller as a potential center option, which might make a little more sense, but again, JT Miller hasn't really played center whatsoever in Vancouver, so I don't really see where that really correlates either, especially if you want him to just have that point production and have that as the main draw. But it seems like, again, for Minnesota, this is an obvious target. This is a guy they absolutely love and want to have on the team for that playoff run and that playoff push. Now, if you've noticed so far, all the trade rumors we talked about up to this point have been the Minnesota Wild's interest in JT Miller in a trade with the Vancouver Canucks, not so much the Vancouver Canucks' interest and lack thereof, which is for a very good reason. Now, Satira Shaw of Sports at 650 put in a very interesting quote recently, and Taj also paraphrases this, saying this: Satira Shaw is reported that Canucks aren't shopping JT Miller. He can't dispute if other teams called, but the Canucks aren't shopping him. Now, first things first, just because the Canucks aren't shopping him, or shopping him doesn't mean that they aren't going to trade him eventually. That's a pretty wide known fact. But also, he also doesn't dispute that other teams aren't calling for him. So that means that, again, Minnesota's interest is pretty much confirmed at this point, and other teams are on the hunt for him. But we do know now that Vancouver, at least publicly, isn't really trying to trade JT Miller up to this point, or it isn't their number one priority, which, with how bad the team is playing right now and how much ownership gaps there are, I can kind of see where they're coming from. Now, another quote also supports that, this time from Rick Dhaliwal, of course, an amazing reporter with Vancouver, and he had a pretty interesting quote as well this morning where he spoke with JT Miller's agent, Brian Barlett, and Brian Barlett said this: "We have not had any conversations with the Canucks about anything involving trades. JT is focused on righting the ship there." So we get, again, confirmation that at least with JT Miller and the relationship with the Canucks, it doesn't seem like it's been a very open conversation. Doesn't seem like they've talked about trades whatsoever, and that would make sense in my opinion. I don't think they're going to do that yet, but again, it could be something potentially down the line that we do see. And another thing that also, I think I got the vibe from that Ben Kuzma, the Province article, was that we don't have to really see a trade right now or a move right now. This could still be something that goes down the line, potentially at the NHL trade deadline, and Minnesota would still be interested in that. Again, one of the main things he talks about was Minnesota's push for the playoffs, trying to compete in the playoffs and trying to separate themselves from the rest of that Central Division. And at the trade deadline, that would be the perfect opportunity to add a guy like JT Miller and still be able to make that happen. So it doesn't seem like this needs to be an imminent trade for it to actually happen this season. Now, regarding Brock Boeser as well, I've also seen a ton of speculation about him potentially being a trade. Obviously, Brock Boeser is a Minnesota native, and I think there could be a strong connection there if he were to go to Minnesota, but he seems a lot less likely, in my opinion, to actually get traded, mostly because that trade value will be so much higher than JT Miller. I mean, we're talking about Kevin Fiala and potentially a second and maybe a third for JT Miller. If the Wild are actually going to trade for Brock Boeser, it would likely include maybe a top prospect, maybe a great defensive prospect like a Kalen Addison, a Ryan O'Rourke perhaps. There would be a lot of options on the table for Minnesota to trade, but I don't think they'd be jumping for it like they potentially could with JT Miller. I mean, JT Miller is a good veteran player, has been in the playoffs many times, has performed in the playoffs in the past, and is a great point per game player as well. But I think for Minnesota, obviously they would like to have both, but it's going to be one or the other, and it feels like JT Miller just is the more likely target. Even though Brock Boeser going back to his hometown team would be an absolutely amazing story, I do think for Minnesota, at least, the only way they get Brock Boeser is if JT Miller is off the table or traded already, which I don't really see being a great possibility. I still think if anybody's going to trade for JT Miller at this point, it feels like Minnesota will be that team on day one trying to make it happen. Now, going back to that original trade idea involving JT Miller and Kevin Fiala, let's say it is JT Miller to Minnesota for Kevin Fiala and 2 second-round picks. I think that would be pretty interesting for both teams involved, and there's a lot of moving parts here because both players are relatively uncertain when it comes to their future. JT Miller has this year and next at a $5.2 million cap hit, and of course, he's a UFA and can go wherever he wants. Meanwhile, for Kevin Fiala, he'll be an RFA after this year, and even though he is an RFA, that's still pretty open as a 25-year-old age, and he's a guy that could also have a lot of opportunities, potential offer sheets and stuff like that if Vancouver doesn't handle their cap correctly, which it's Jim Benning, so he'll obviously stay and not handle it correctly. So it will be a situation where Vancouver's going to have to make sure they sign Fiala and get him under a deal somehow, which is going to be hard even with JT Miller's $5.2 million cap hit going off the books. It's not going to be easy whatsoever, especially since Kevin Fiala, again, had problems in Nashville, had problems in Minnesota, and might still even have problems in Vancouver. Who even knows if he wants to be in Vancouver and wants to stay there long term? There's a lot of moving parts with Fiala especially. But just looking at the trade by itself, JT Miller this season so far, 28 years old, 19 points in 19 games played, 7 goals, 12 assists. Meanwhile, for Kevin Fiala, who hasn't really had that much power play opportunity and great offensive opportunities, has still done pretty well production-wise, getting 3 goals, 9 assists, 12 points in 18 games played. There's a lot of moving parts there, but I think for Vancouver, he would be a great skilled addition, but again, I'm not quite sure if that's exactly what Vancouver needs right now, if they need another skilled player. Personally, for me, it's a trade that if you don't change the management, if you don't change the coaching style, I don't think Kevin Fiala is going to do much better in Vancouver than he's doing in Minnesota, and I think they might go back to square one when it's all said and done. So I think personally, before they make this trade, management and coaching should be changed before they even think about making this deal happen. Now, we have Have a little bit of breaking news here in the video. When it comes to Brock Boeser's side of things, Rick Dhaliwal contacted JT Miller's agent, and he's also contacted Brock Boeser's agent about a potential trade. And Ben Hankinson, Brock Boeser's agent, said this on his clients. I do not believe Brock will be traded, but he knows it could happen. It is a part of the business. Brock does have faith in his Canucks team and his teammates to get through this. And I want to go back to even trading Brock Boeser and that whole idea. Personally, I think it would be an absolute disaster for the Vancouver Canucks. I can see why they would get rid of JT Miller. He's a guy that does have his flaws, even if the production is great. But Brock Boeser is a guy that I don't think the Canucks really need to trade whatsoever. I feel like if they make a coaching change, simply put, Brock Boeser will be better. One of the main things I've seen with Vancouver is just a lack of confidence with some of the younger players under Travis Green. And I feel like Brock Boeser is the biggest example of it. He's a guy that when he is on his highest confidence, when he does have that high flavor to his game, he's a guy that can be pretty unstoppable at times. And I feel like for Vancouver, they haven't quite truly unlocked that since his rookie season. And I'm hoping if Vancouver does make a coaching change, Brock Boeser will be a great beneficiary of that. And I do hope that Vancouver does not trade Brock Boeser, because I think he could be such a huge part of that team going forward still. And I feel like, again, like a guy like JT Miller makes a lot more sense, especially with him being a UFA in a year and a half. But it goes back to really the big point I'm trying to make here that I even said in the last Canucks video that I made, is the fact that for Vancouver, I don't really see too much of a point in even trading anybody at this point. I still think this Vancouver Canucks team on paper can be pretty solid, especially when they are healthy. It just feels like the management and the coaching has been an absolute disappointment, and truly the ownership as well is a part of that. But the management has been awful. I think the coaching has been even more awful at times, just basically mishandling every single part of this Canucks team. But I feel like for the Canucks, if they've made a coaching change and that coach was able to bring some confidence on the younger players, was able to get a more stingy style for that Canucks defense, and was able to give Datrunenko an actual chance this season, I feel like the Canucks could be a much more effective team and could be an actual playoff team. That to me is the worst part about this situation, is the more they just sit around and wait for things to happen, the more they'll end up losing and the less chance they'll have on actually making this season competitive. That to me is the worst part. It seems like this road trip for Vancouver is going to be the most important part of the season, but in my opinion, the team's already been lost. The franchise should have already changed at this point. For no reason. Why? I don't know for any reason why Jim Benning and Travis Green are still in their spots right now, besides the ownership just being absolutely complacent and wanting to get the most average team in the NHL possible. To me, I don't feel like that's a winning plan whatsoever, and I feel like for Vancouver, the more they wait, the more it's going to be a terrible situation. And if they allow Jim Benning to even contemplate trading JT Miller or even Brock Boeser, heaven forbid, I feel like the Canucks will be in a much worse position than they would have if they just made a change and actually sucked it up for once. I feel like for the Canucks, their pride needs to be shelved for eternity, because this team, this management, and this system is not working. And JT Miller, Brock Boeser, all these players will be so much better if a change happens. I don't think the Canucks need to make a trade. I don't even know if the Minnesota Wild need to make a trade. But for the Canucks specifically, these trades don't work in my opinion, and they don't help the team like they could if you just made the moves you needed to make in the first place. Fire Jim Benning, fire Travis Green, and stop being stupid. Yeah, that was pretty blunt, wasn't it? But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. Maybe let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think of this trade rumors? Do you guys think that this trade could actually happen? What do you think about Vancouver right now? And what do you think of this potential trade? Let me know all your thoughts. Make sure you share this video with your friends, get it out there, subscribe, hit that like button, hit that notification bell. Make sure you click on this card for all my trade rumor content right on one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.